Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Market Update, where we discuss leading economic and financial developments in Asia, Europe, and North America. My name is Tony. There is a lot to cover in today's episode, so let's jump in. And first up, Japan's financial markets are under increasing strain as political uncertainty, surging bond yields, and a declining export sector raise alarm bells among investors. The 10-year Japanese government bond JGB yield rose to 1.595% on Tuesday, the highest level since the 2008 global financial crisis, a strong sign of the vulnerabilities that have been emerging following the Bank of Japan's retreat from its aggressive bond buying policy. Although the yield increase was a modest 2.5 basis points, the move reflects mounting investor concerns ahead of this Sunday's upper house election, where Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's ruling coalition risks losing its majority. Politicians on all sides are pledging increased spending and potential tax cuts, a strategy designed to win voter favor, but that risks further straining Japan's already fragile fiscal position. The election has triggered what some analysts are calling a Liz Truss moment for Japan, referring to the UK's 2022 market chaos, where financially expensive promises unsettled bond markets. Quote, "Bond vigilantes are finally focusing on Japan," end quote, said an analyst at Asymmetric Advisors, citing the country's towering debt-to-GDP ratio and the looming cost of refinancing older, low-yielding bonds in the higher rate environment. Spillover effects are being felt beyond Japan. The sell-off in its $7.7 trillion bond market is amplifying volatility in global debt markets already jittery over rising deficits in major economies, an area we've been following for some time now. We covered the French situation yesterday and general bond yield increases across the developed world earlier this week. Japan's 20 and 30-year bond yields reached levels not seen since 1999, and further upward pressure on rates could worsen borrowing conditions for households and businesses. Analysts warn that a continued rise in the 10-year yield, closely tied to mortgage and corporate loan rate, could push Japan toward recession. Indeed, the economic outlook is already dimming. Japan's exports fell 0.5% in June, their second consecutive monthly decline, with auto and steel shipments to the United States hit especially hard by President Donald Trump's tariff campaign, more of which we'll cover shortly. Exports to the US dropped 11.4%, with vehicle shipments falling 27% in value, even though the number of cars shipped increased slightly. Analysts say Japanese automakers are slashing prices to stay competitive, absorbing tariff costs at the expense of profits. This would undermine the claim by some economists that American consumers pay all the costs of tariff increases. Adding to the pressure is the Trump administration's decision to raise blanket tariffs on all Japanese exports to 25%, effective the 1st of August. Sector-specific duties, 25% on autos and 50% on steel, are already in place. Despite 7 trips to Washington by Ishiba's trade envoy, Rosei Akazawa, no deal has been reached, further clouding Japan's economic future. The political stakes are high. Losing the upper house would not topple Ishiba's government, but it would weaken its ability to enact policy or close a trade deal before the tariff hike. Markets are bracing for a potential triple fall scenario in yen, bonds and equities if populist or anti-establishment parties make further gains. The Topex index has already dipped 1.2% in July, breaking a 3-month winning streak. While some see the current volatility as temporary, the combination of rising borrowing costs, weak trade and political uncertainty is forcing investors to confront the risks of Japan's evolving economic landscape. As the nation grapples with inflation, stagnant wages, and external shocks, bond yields may only be the first crack in Japan's economic armor. Next up, US President Donald Trump is once again escalating his trade agenda with a sweeping plan to impose uniform tariffs on more than 150 countries, targeting imports with levies of 10% to 15% unless new trade terms are secured. Speaking from the White House on yesterday, the US President said letters would be sent notifying governments of their new tariff rates, declaring, quote, "It's all going to be the same for everyone, for that group," end quote. These countries, he emphasized, are not major trading partners. Quote, "They don't do that much business," end quote, Trump said, indicating his strategy was aimed at securing revenue from a broad base of smaller economies while reserving tailored negotiations for major players like the European Union, Canada, and India. The move is part of a wider tariff blitz launched in recent weeks. Trading partners have received letters warning of new duties kicking in on the 1st of August unless they strike favorable deals with the United States. Though initially framed as a negotiation tactic, Trump has described the letters themselves as, quote, deals, end quote, revealing little appetite for external diplomacy. Still, he left the door open to modify tariff levels if countries offer concessions, as Indonesia recently did, agreeing to purchase $19.5 billion in US goods and 50 Boeing aircraft in return for a reduced 19% tariff. Trump is also preparing sector-specific duties. He announced plans to impose low initial tariffs on pharmaceuticals by the end of July, with rates potentially rising to 200% after a one-year transition for companies to reshore production. Semiconductor tariffs are also in the works, with the president saying they would follow a similar timeline. He has already announced a 50% levy on copper imports, citing national security risks under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. Critics argue the policy risks raising costs for American consumers and undermining global supply chains. Pharmaceutical firms like Pfizer and others that produce abroad could be hit hard, as could electronic giants Apple and Samsung, whose devices rely on foreign chip makers. Yet the response from US trading partners has been largely muted. Apart from China and Canada, few countries have retaliated. The European Union has postponed counter tariffs, linking them to ongoing talks ahead of the 1st of August deadline. Trump said EU negotiators would meet with US officials this week, but suggested indifference to whether a deal is reached. Some economists argue that the lack of a coordinated global response has emboldened the US president. The US collected $64 billion in customs duties in Q2, a record high, while foreign retaliation has been minimal. China's customs revenue rose just 1.9% year-on-year in May, despite its countermeasures. Quote, many countries learned from the 2018 through 2019 trade war that retaliation often leads to counter-retaliation rather than negotiated solutions, end quote, said Martin Bengoa, a professor of international economics at City University of New York. Others, like Alexander Klein at the University of Sussex, argue that short-term concerns, particularly inflation and supply chain disruption, are driving compliance with US demands. The US's dominance in global consumption makes coordinated pushback unlikely as well. Quote, unlike the 1930s when countries had more balanced trade relationships, today's world features a hub-and-spoke system with the United States at the center, end quote, Bengoa added. Now there is quite an irony here. One of the motivations of the US to engage in this trade reset is to have more balanced trading relationships, and because there is so much imbalance with so many major economies, from Germany to Korea, reliant on US consumption, they are in no position to push back. Indeed, those economies that had far more balanced trade relationships with the United States, like the United Kingdom, were able to quickly ink a deal. With negotiations ongoing with countries like India and threats of even higher tariffs on Brazil and Russia-linked nations, Trump's message is clear. Offer concessions or pay a premium for the privilege of selling to the world's biggest consumer market. For now, much of the world appears to be going with compliance. Now, if you want to be on top of the most up-to-date analysis on the biggest developments in the most important markets around the world, including the ongoing trade reset, consider subscribing to Market Update. Hit the bell notification icon and you will be. And if you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button and share with someone who you think would also get some value. And finally for today, we move to Europe. In a piece published today, UK-based The Financial Times reports that European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's ambitious €2 trillion budget plan for 2028 through 34 has ignited a rare internal backlash within Brussels, exposing deep tensions over her centralised leadership style and the Commission's decision-making process. The draft budget, which significantly expands the EU's spending from the current €1.2 trillion, was developed in near secrecy and presented to commissioners with minimal consultation. The result? A wave of discontent that forced last-minute concessions before the proposal's release. Critics within the Commission described von der Leyen's approach as a rubber stamp process, sidelining her fellow commissioners until the final moments. The Budget Commissioner tasked with championing the proposal reportedly had no clear understanding of the funding formula just hours before the unveiling. The chaotic internal rollout culminated in a 15-hour meeting of cabinet chiefs, stretching into the early hours before the the plan's adoption. In a bid to quell dissent, von der Leyen offered several concessions, including 500 billion euros in subsidies for farmers and fishers, restoring social spending funds and limiting a proposed corporate tax to firms with turnover above 100 million euros. Despite these changes, opposition is mounting outside Brussels. Germany, the EU's largest economy, flatly rejected the proposal. Quote, "A comprehensive increase in the EU budget is unacceptable," end quote, said a government spokesperson. The Commission claims national contributions will remain unchanged, with the funding gap filled by 400 billion euros in new levies on corporations, e-waste, overseas packages, tobacco, and VAT increases, value-added tax. However, officials across member states remain sceptical. Quote, "They live in their own world," end quote, one Treasury official reportedly told the Financial Times. Von der Leyen defended her approach, citing the scale of the task. Quote, "This is a marathon. There was a lot of contention," end quote, she acknowledged, adding that a, quote, "collegial decision," end quote, had been reached. Still, frustrations persist. Her powerful chief of staff is seen as a gatekeeper, further narrowing the decision-making circle. While only one commissioner formally opposed the budget, insiders warn that negotiations with member states will be even more difficult. Okay, that is today's episode of Market Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Thursday, and I will see you for this week's final episode either tomorrow on Friday or for a weekend edition on Saturday.